This is the second lesson in the HTML and CSS unit of work. Now what we'll quickly look at is if we can remember what CSS is and how it works. We're going to understand how to change the background of a page using CSS, and also we're going to have a look at how we can alter the look of images using CSS code. Okay, so here we are in our integrated development environment, and let's have a little play around with a bit of CSS code to improve the presentation of the page. So to begin with, all we've got here is some HTML code. We've got some code for a heading, and we've got some code for a paragraph, and you can see how this is presented on the page on the right hand side. Now if we want to add a bit of CSS code, we need to remember that it goes between style tags. Now our closing style tag of course needs to have a / in it, and any of the CSS code that we write goes between these tags. Now I'm going to begin by applying some style tags, some CSS code, to the body tag. Now the body is the page itself. So if I was to want to apply some CSS code to the body tag, then what I would do is I'd write the name of the tag, as you can see here, body. I'd open up my curly brackets, and inside I will begin to write my CSS code. Now what I want to do is I want to change the background color of the page. So I'm going to write in background -color. I'm going to put a colon, and then I'm going to choose to write aqua, and if I was to run that code, you can see that the background color changes to aqua. Now the nice thing is with CSS code is that we can actually alter the background colors so that it's not just one solid color, but it's actually a graded color. Now this is how I do it. I'd actually use a slightly different command than what we see here. Instead of background color, I'll just write background, and then what I'd need to do is write in linear gradient, and in brackets I can put the two colors that I want the graded colors to be. So if I did white, aqua, and I run that code, you can see that the two colors blend into each other quite nicely. Okay, so another thing that we could do to our page is we could add a border around it. So if I wrote the CSS command border, and then I said I wanted a border which is 10 pixels wide, and I wanted it to be solid, and let's start off and say that I want it to be black, and I run that code, you can see that a border is applied to the background. Now one issue that we've got is that the text is very close to that edge on the left hand side, so what we could do is we could add some padding to the left. So I could say padding -left, and I could then say let's have about 20 pixels, so it will push the text over 20 pixels to the right hand side. Now another thing we could do with our border is that we could curve an edge or two, or a corner or two. So what I could do is I could type in the following command, which is border top left radius, and then I could say again 20 pixels, and I run that code, you can see that we've got a nice curved edge there to that particular corner. And of course if I said top right radius, then I would get it on the right hand side as well. So that's how you could add a border to your page. Again, another example of CSS improving the look of a web page. Now let's have a look to see how we can use a bit of CSS code to alter the look of an image. Now in my HTML code, I'm just going to add an image that I've found off the internet. So I will paste the link and run that code. So you can see that the image is rather large. Now what I could do is use a bit of CSS code just to make that image a little bit smaller, and then we'll apply some other formatting technique, CSS code, to format the image slightly differently. Now if I was to write img as the image, the tag that I want to now apply some CSS code, I open up my curly brackets. What I could do is I could begin just to maybe change the height and the width of this particular image, because it's rather large at the moment. So let's say that I want it to be 200 pixels wide, and I want it to be 200 pixels in height, just so that we can see the image a little bit better. Okay, so the CSS code has been applied to the image tag correctly there. So what it might be nice to do is to instead of having these sharp edges, to maybe curve the edges a little bit like we saw that we could do to the border on the body of the page itself. Now what I could do is I could use that same property really. I could say that I want border dash radius. I want to apply a border radius to it, but I want it to be 25 pixels just to curve those edges of the image. And once applied, you can see that the image has got some nice curved edges there, which is much smarter. Now, of course, as we've used before, and just to remind you what we did look at last lesson, is that we can apply CSS code to other tags, not just the body and the image that we've seen here. But let's imagine that we want to improve the heading. I could say that I want my heading 1 tag to have a particular type of font. Let's say that it's going to be font family, Century Gothic. And I run that code. You can see that the text font has changed there. Maybe I want it to be a little bit larger. So I could say that I want the font size to be 10 pixels. That's a little bit too small, isn't it? So let's change that to 50 pixels and see what we have. That's much better. And perhaps we want it to be centered. So I could say text align, center, American spelling. And that text is now in the middle. And of course, it might be that I want the same font, although I want it smaller, for the paragraph tag. So what I could do is I could just copy this code, paste that lower, apply that font family of Century Gothic to the paragraph tag, make sure I close my curly bracket and run my code, and you can see that the text has now been applied. The font has been applied to the text, sorry. So here you can see that just with a few little bits of CSS code we can completely alter the look of a web page. So hopefully that's just deepened your understanding of CSS code and given you a few more tips and tricks for when you improve the look of your own web pages.